This podcast is brought to you by JAM, Junction Arts and Media, building community in the Upper Valley through media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Going to Dismas. One of the core principles of Dismas of Vermont is to have student involvement. The original Dismas House in Nashville, Tennessee, it was actually, the composition of that house was half Vanderbilt students and half formerly incarcerated individuals, and that's where the original model came from before Rita and Frank McCaffrey took that model and brought it to Vermont. So with me today I have two Dartmouth students, Molly and Marisa, and then former resident Kevin, who moved out a couple of years ago. Let's start out with Molly. It's just, even before you ever became involved in this, just where you're from, like, what was your road to Dartmouth?
Sure. So I'm Molly. I am a senior at Dartmouth. I'm from Newton, Massachusetts. And before Dartmouth, I actually took a gap year, during which I worked at a ski resort and did some research in a lab. And then within about a year of going to Dartmouth, I became involved with Dismas House.
Yeah. My name's Marisa. I'm also a senior at Dartmouth. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. And yeah, I got involved at the same time as Molly with Dismas about, I think it was like
June 2021.
Yeah. So 2 years. It was the summer after our sophomore year.
And now you guys are both council members.
Yeah.
Which is something we haven't done before as far as having Dartmouth students. It's a relationship we're always looking to build. What inspired you to become involved in Dismas, and what have you done there? Like, what's your goals?
Yeah, so we were originally really inspired by the mission of Dismas and facilitating that social integration after incarceration. And we found that there was a lot of different roles we could take on at Dismas, which was a wonderful experience and has really enabled us to kind of grow during our time at Dismas. So a main thing that we do is we visit each week, and we are part of the resident life committee, and we help residents with different kinds of tasks, like looking for jobs online, looking for future housing, filling out various kinds of paperwork, using technology. And then we also have a role on the local council, through which we kind of help plan events and are liaisons between the Dartmouth community and Hartford Dismas.
Molly kind of said it, but I feel like my goals at Dismas and, like coming into Dismas and getting involved, I didn't like totally understand everything about the house, but I feel like as I've learned more about the house now, it's really fun to get to meet new people and get to hear everyone's journey and, how they came to Dismas and kind of like where they're going after is kind of been my favorite part of like talking to the residents. And then I think we've just had the opportunity to like help with a lot of important tasks that the residents have every week, like helping them do like Skype calls with their family and things like that, which I think like are skills that like using technology in particular is like a skill that I think I take for granted. And like, it's nice to feel like it can be useful in some way.
Definitely. Some of that stuff would have been helpful. Like even when I was there a couple of years ago, like I never knew anything about any Skype videos or anything like that. And I was struggling to get, back and forth from White River down here to Barry Williamstown area to even see my kids. And I mean, my biggest goal when I first got out of jail, I told Robert, one of the directors back then, right away, I'm like, I'm going to get my license and I'm going to get a car and I'm going to go see my kids. And
You kind of jumped the question. That was exactly what I was going to ask. I was like, would students performing this function been helpful to you at your time? Let's even back up another step. What's your name? Where are you from? I don't know. We didn't do an introduction yet.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Upham. I am a former resident of the Dismas House, like Jeff said. I'm originally from the Bethel-Randolph area, which I now live back at the Randolph area. And yeah, I was at Dismas House. Well, I don't remember the dates now. I had them on my phone from when you originally messaged me. But
nearly 2 years.
I was there for a year and a half, almost 2 years, yes, until I finally maxed out. And
now, would having Molly and Marisa there at that time, which the resident life function didn't exist, would that have been helpful to you? I mean, staff try to do as best they can, but
Oh, I mean, certainly, even the staff back then. I mean, the staff was just, wonderful. I mean, I think even at the house, even what I had back then was just amazing. The way we guys went out and into the community and talked to different businesses and explained, what you guys were and that, we were, former inmates and that we are just, back in the community and looking for work. I mean, even that is a huge step I've always thought. But yeah, I mean, anything like that would have been, hugely great in the house as well to, help getting hold of family or, seeing family, talking to family, because like I said, my kids were up Barry Williamstown area and I didn't have really much contact with them unless my father came and got me and brought me up there, or until I got my license myself and got a car myself and got myself up there. And
now, Marisa, you mentioned that, one of your favorite parts are the resident stories. I mean, that's one of the purposes of this podcast. I mean, everybody has a story, but not everybody has a voice. And this is, a platform to do as such. Are there any stories of residents or how you've interacted with residents that really stick out to you in the last year or so?
Yeah, I think the story that comes to mind is when Molly and I first started volunteering. There was a resident and he, like, every week we would come in, he had like something he wanted us to do. Like he like clearly like really appreciated us coming in. It was like, oh, I got this new smartwatch. I need help setting it up. I need help finding this paperwork. And I just like, we like through our sessions, like developed really good connection. And he like also made like these little soap sculptures and little.
He was actually on this podcast.
Oh,
not
really?
that long ago. Yeah.
Okay. And he would like give us little trinkets to like thank us for help.
I still have one of the trinkets in my car, the little
Yeah.
soap.
Yeah, I
trinket.
have in my room. He gave me like this little like wooden box that's really beautiful.
Yeah, he's dispersed his artwork into the Dismas community. It's kind of nice.
And I think like because we saw him like every week and he was like consistently every week would ask for help. Like, I think we got to know him really well and like it felt like.
And his story is,
great to be a part of it.
He spent nearly 13 continuous years in jail prior to Dismas. So a function like you were serving was of vital importance. I mean, he had no idea about a smartphone.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine at that rate. I mean, I was only in for 10 months. To think 13 years. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. The first time we met him, what we did was he transferred contacts from his notebook to his phone. Right. And we taught him how to add contacts.
Yeah.
And it was really a wake-up call to us of like how technology has developed in recent years and how if you've been removed from kind of that evolution, it's such a barrier upon reentry to kind of figure out all these new technology skills.
And it's a total necessity to be able to do Zoom calls.
And it's like hard, I think, which is why I think Dismas is so great. It's like hard to find the people who are going to sit down and manually transfer all your contacts from your address book to your phone and like teach you how to set up your watch. Like those are not like things that are easily accessible, which I think Dismas does a really good job of supporting.
Right. I mean, I was always willing to help, but I'm always moving in 7 directions at once. So I don't necessarily have the time to do that. I'll tell you how to do it, but
yeah.
So to have volunteers that were willing to come in, I think one of the things that stuck out for me when you guys first started showing up, he said, well, we may not know how to do everything, but we know how to Google. So
I remember they would have been hugely helpful when I first got out. Remember when I first got out, you helped me try to figure out how to get the online state-funded cell phone, smartphone, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Remember that? And we couldn't figure it out because they kept telling us that the Dismas House was not a legal address. I'm like,
that's right.
What do we do?
Yeah. Right. All right. So Kevin, what's your story? If you don't mind sharing, what's the story that landed you in jail and ultimately to Dismas, ultimately to this podcast?
I guess it began with the mother of my daughter. That's when I realized I got pretty severe anger issues that everything just escalated. And in one of our arguments one evening, the argument ensued and flared. So I slapped my sneaker off the counter to create a loud slap. And unfortunately, I just snapped it way too hard. It came down off the counter and caught her in the back of the shoulder and left, a pretty good red print and whatnot. The neighbors had called the police because of the whole entire argument, the fighting, the screaming, everything. And when the police came, I slapped the sneaker down off the counter. It came down and caught her in the back. And so I caught a domestic assault charge for that. I got put on probation. So I ended up messaging her, horrible things. She ended up filing for a relief of abuse order against me. So I went like that for quite some time. So eventually it got to a point where we finally went to court for visitations for my daughter. Court made it mandatory that it would be supervised visits through the capstone in Barry. And my daughter was like 6 months old at the time. She didn't know anybody but her mother. It's supposed to be an hour-long visit. She'd be screaming for 15 minutes straight, and they'd call her mother and tell her mother to come get her. And eventually that got to a point where I'm like, I understand she's screaming. She doesn't want to be here. She doesn't want to be with you guys. Well, at that point, I got kind of sick of trying to hitchhike from Bethel to Barry to try to see my daughter. So I borrowed a car from my brother. My brother had gotten this little Chevy Aveo given to him for free. Rather than trying to drive that thing from Bethel to Barry every week with no gas, no job, no nothing, I just packed up what I had and moved to Barry and just lived in Barry in the car. That way I'd already be in Barry. I ended up finding a part-time job working for the Salvation Army. But for them, I would ride around the box shop. We'd go around to the different Salvation Army thrift stores and pick up what they didn't want anymore. And so the night she messaged me, and so I messaged back straight up. I'm like, living in my car, just trying to make it to these visits, and that's pretty much that. She ended up messaging me back and told me if I got too cold some night, that I was more than welcome to go back down to her place and crash for the evening and whatnot. And there was one evening that I was out and about and didn't get myself back into the warehouse in time where I was working to be able to stay in there for the night. And I didn't have crap for gas in the little Chevy Aveo, and I couldn't afford to keep it running all night to try to keep myself warm. So I went to her place and knocked on the door probably 1 a.m. Upon waking up in the morning, I woke up to my daughter. She's all giggles and all smiles and all playful and everything. And so I was there for probably a week or so before my little brother ended up putting in for a welfare check on me. There was one Wednesday evening. On Wednesday evenings, it was court ordered that I would go and pick up my daughter and do like a little daughter-daddy dinner date, even though she was only like 6 or 8 months old. We weren't doing much for dinner dates. I'd take her to like Walmart or something like that when we were doing it. It was a Wednesday evening, so the cops knew that I was, supposed to go pick up my daughter, and so they went and knocked on my ex's door, probably 10 o'clock at night, and I was, my car was in the dooryard. I was there. The cop was actually pretty decent about it. He told me straight up, he's like, look, you're not supposed to be here. It's getting sent to your PO. It's going to be a violation. And so I stayed, knowing that wasn't going to be good. And there was one evening when this thing just blew right out of proportion. And so I ended up with her and my daughter in the car and doing a reverse 180 in the middle of the road and went straight back to her house. So yeah, the argument ensued and continued and whatnot. And I got back to her house and I was screaming at her to get the hell out of my car. Just get the hell out of my car so I could go. Just get out. Just get out. I was screaming. Thought my lungs. I didn't know how to get out of my car. She was refusing to get out. And the neighbors again proceeded to call the cops. And that's when I went to jail for violating 2 counts of violation of a release of abuse order, 2 counts violation probation, 2 counts, just a bunch of violations basically. And I was ended up being in jail for 10 months. I had racked up a couple other court dates for, driving a no license. And
let's break in the story here. We can get into the court system. Molly and Marisa, immediate reactions to hearing Kevin's story.
It's always really insightful to hear these stories, and not everyone shares them with us, but oftentimes they do, and they're all so different. But I think the common theme is just like trying to do the right thing in a system that makes it really hard.
Yeah, I would echo that. I feel like a lot of, like Kevin's and a lot of stories we've heard is like people who are just like trying to do the right thing and put in a really tough circumstance, and like, like you act the way you act in like your lowest points. And
I think it really speaks to the depth of a person. I mean, my interactions with Kevin over 2+ years at this point, I wouldn't know anything about that. I've never seen the slightest hint of anger. He's always happy-go-lucky. He laughs at literally everything. He's a goofball. He parks his car inside of a camping tent on a camping trip just to sleep in his car. He beat my own system. And I think that's what's fascinating about, the human services field. There's so much to the story. And even though this spanned for, probably a little bit of time, months, years, I don't see that as who you are as a person.
I really appreciate that deeply. I've been trying to explain every single person has their breaking point. Just everybody. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how bad you are. Everybody has their breaking point. And when they get to that breaking point, you're poking a bear. It's essentially you're poking a bear, or you're poking a bobcat, or whether you're poking a snake, or
So before we get into how the judge and court system handled your case, Molly and Marisa, if you were sitting as the judge or jury, what questions would you ask of Kevin for more information to like clarify the situation? It's not as simple as a domestic assault charge in violation of RFA. Like, what is a reasonable insight into the situation that we could better understand what's happening, where we wouldn't have to put Kevin in jail for a year? Like, say you're a judge, what would you impose on Kevin for the situation?
I feel like I something that Kevin explained really well that I think is like good for I don't really know how the courts operate, but I think it's like really good to put his situation is like the context of like what happened, the whole like story leading up to it, like hearing about his relationship with his daughter, I think like really like allows you to empathize with him and like.
And I'm willing to bet you really didn't get the opportunity to explain it to that effect in the courtroom.
Not at all. The courts didn't really seem to even care what I had to say, it seemed to me, and that's the way I felt. I mean, so when I went to court for the RFA, so if someone files for an RFA against you, you need to go to court, and the court needs to decide if there's enough to impose that RFA or not. And so we were in court for the RFA. I made up 18 pages of text messages, all from her. Of all those text messages, I would say she'd be trying to get me to go over hang out with her and my daughter, and then when I would ignore her messages, she'd be messaging me back, telling me how much of a piece of shit I am. And the judge didn't care. The judge pretty much just said, well, if you agree to it, we'll send you to Capstone so you can see your daughter. And so whatever, that's just the way, so I'm like, whatever, if I can see my daughter.
Now, is this family court or criminal court?
It was a criminal thing of court, but the way her lawyer put it in was if I agreed to the RFA, because I think they knew if I tried to fight the RFA that it wasn't going to get much of anywhere, because she tried it again and I showed up. I'm like, well, this is what she's doing, and then they didn't get her nowhere. We'll send him to an hour-long weekly visits with his daughter, Capstone. He can see his daughter every week for an hour. And so I'm like, if I can see my daughter every week for an hour, let's do it. Where do I sign?
How much say did you get? Did you get a 30-second opportunity to say present your case to the judge?
It was basically me trying to explain myself to that before her lawyer stepped in and said, well, if he agrees to it, then he can see his daughter, Capstone for an hour a week.
And this included some jail time?
No.
That came later.
That came later after the RFA was imposed and I violated it.
Right.
Then the jail time came.
Domestic situations are so layered. There's so much to them. So it's less risky for them to put you in jail than to leave you out in case something does go bad and they were wrong, which is the worst case scenario for them. I mean, I understand both sides of it. I'm not saying it's right.
I was just going to ask Kevin what it was like after you were released from jail. And did you go straight to dismiss?
I did. I went straight to dismiss. When I first went and got my court date wrapped up and dealt with, and I was eligible for release, my caseworker in jail was trying to help me, find a place to get out to and whatnot, because I needed, if you get out to probation, you can basically get out to whatever residence. FSU, if you get FSU,
which stands for Field Supervision Unit, for
yes.
those who don't know.
If you get FSU needs to approve your residence before you get out. So I agreed to my court and everything. Didn't really think much of anything of it because I was on probation before I went to jail. So I'm like, they'll let me get out to my old hunting camp. That's where I was before I went to jail, and that's where they found me. They came out to see me there, whatever. They'll let me back out to that. Nope. FSU, completely different story. Nope, there's no power, no running water. Your phone could die. We can't get a hold of you. You can't stay there. Well, crap, I don't know what to do now. I don't know where I'm going to get out to.
Yeah. I think they view domestics as particularly risky, too. They want to keep an eye and keep in touch.
Right. And so after that, it became trying to find housing such as Dismas or something along that lines that I could get out to. And so I wanted to get out to the Barry area originally because that's where my kids were. That's where my daughter is. My boys are in Williamstown. And they came to the jail and still denied me. They didn't even give me much of a reason. And so a little bit after that, my caseworker, told me about the Dismas House down White River. And I'm like, I don't really want to get out to the White River area, but if if it's out, it's out, whatever, I'll try it. So I applied for it and went along after that. My caseworker told me I was approved. I'm like, what do you mean I'm approved? Like, people haven't talked to me. They haven't came to meet me. Like nothing. Like I'm approved just like that. Yep. Wow. And so for me, I kind of instantly had, a deep respect for the Dismas House anyway, just because I'd already poured my heart and soul out to these other people, and they just basically, shut the door in my face. And Jeff and the people of the Dismas House accepted me without even talking to me or meeting me at all. And so I just had a great deal of respect just for that reason alone.
I think you got caught in transition between house directors, and we may have dropped the ball. It worked out.
It did. It worked out to me. Like I said, I had, instantly a great deal of respect just for that reason anyway alone, because it just meant a lot to me. And so.
All right, before we wrap up the court section of the podcast. Okay, so Judge Molly has the full scope of the situation. Do you have other charges prior to this situation?
I had charges.
But like other criminal charges. Do you have other adult criminal charges besides this?
So I had a criminal DOS that I was fighting up in the Lindenville area, so that they had to...
Driving on a suspended license.
Yes.
Yep.
And then White River gave me a few charges for freaking out on them for, vandalized their huge door in front of the courthouse.
Judge Molly, we have Kevin, who is guilty of driving on a suspended license.
Yeah, I got like disorderly conduct and some other stuff from White River. And
convicted of violating a relief from abuse order. What do you say is an appropriate sentence? I mean, you have all the tools in front of you. You have probation, you have whatever. You can order jail time. What is the best approach?
I wish there was an option where Kevin could just go straight to dismiss and have that kind of support in life and that kind of community living and structure while still having normal liberties and freedom.
So you're saying rather than go to jail at all, you get out of your court date and they sentence you to 6 months or a year of living at the Dismas House?
Yeah, where you can have a job and make friends.
And you're still somewhat supervised by...
Yeah, still have a curfew, still have people monitoring you and helping you too, providing you services, helping you figure things out.
We've started this conversation with Dismas, kind of building into the sentencing. We haven't gone very far into it, but I think it's a great idea. How would have that changed your life if you were sentenced to 6 months to a year at Dismas House as opposed to 11 months in jail? You said 11 months?
I didn't really even get served, like even sentenced to any months in jail. It's just when I ended up serving in there. Lack of housing and waiting for them to wrap up the court dates and everything. It just took that long.
But how would that have changed if you just completely bypassed, never went to jail, and went to a structured environment where you were able to visit and drive and work?
I mean, I could have kept my job because I just barely gotten transition from trying to work. Well, I was trying to still work part-time for the Salvation Army and full-time for Capital Candy. I could have just kept my job, or rather I had to give them both of them and
there's a lot of
fight for work all over
collateral consequences of going to jail that doesn't really get talked about. Nobody's paying your bills. Nobody.
Right.
One of the model of Dismas includes having live-in students. Envision yourself, Molly and Marisa, if you were to live at a Dismas house. As it is, it's all men. What would that be like? Because I have had applicants from females that would like to live, and I've considered it, but I've been reluctant to have a single female in a house of men. Tell me what you think that would go like, and then I'll follow up with another question after that.
I feel like everyone I've met at Dismas has been really nice and caring. I think as like probably a woman and a younger woman, I might feel a little uncomfortable.
I think that's the reality of it.
Yeah. It's just like not because of like anyone in particular or like any like personality traits about anyone, just like
would you live in a house of 10 other male Dartmouth students?
No, I wouldn't want that either. I mean, like the thing is like in the dorms, it's like you live with your friends or like people you feel really comfortable with, or like there's like gender balance. I think like just when the gender balance is out of, like one woman
lopsided,
versus
yeah.
Then I think it can feel like a little intimidating or.
Yeah, you agree?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This summer, Marisa was home, but I was on campus. So I visited with my friend who's a boy. And I really noticed that the residents were a little bit quicker to drop their guard when I was there with the boy. And it was really nice because it helped kind of facilitate connections that I feel like are now lasting now that I'm with Marisa, where it's kind of like we're kind of a little bit more inner circle now, where I think
You felt the dynamic was different?
slightly, where I think that maybe at first as a woman living there, it'd be a little stilted and uncomfortable, but I think it would go away with time. And I think it's kind of the same of living in a dorm with 10 boys, maybe not be ideal, where
Right.
it still have some challenge, but I think that the residents have been I've always felt so welcomed and comfortable there, where I think with a little time, it would be doable.
Now, would it change your answer if the house was half women?
Yeah, definitely. I think if
Which it used to be not that long ago, a few years ago.
I mean, yeah, I think if the house was half women, as a woman, it would feel like much safer to live there. But yeah, I can see how that would bring up its own challenges too.
Because we've had cook teams of all young female students come to the house, and realistically, it makes people a little bit excited, and the conversations go on for an hour and a half, and it's a much longer dinner, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, everybody's respectful, but it's a different dynamic. Do you guys have any of you really, about having both genders within a house versus just one?
I mean, the whole gender thing stopped like shortly before I got there. So I heard some rumors of the whole house being broken into 2 different genders. Mm-hmm. And so I can see how it's be pretty difficult to keep the genders apart in required times. And that's especially the way the upstairs of the house is, well, at least was when I was there. I mean, because I could walk from my room right to the other side of the house.
And we've actually sent sections off the back half of the house. Should we ever have female residents again?
I was going to say
with
that.
Separate locks. Yeah.
I was going to say that. So it should be, if you should ever have female residents again, it should be where, the females got their side of the house and the males got their side of the house, and there's no crossing lines.
And truth be told, I kind of preferred it. I liked it better. It broke up the personalities. It was just completely different house dynamic. I mean, the women would play a certain role in the conversation and the energy of the house, and the men, and everything was it was different. It had its own inherent problems, but I preferred it overall. Backtracking to having live-in volunteers, we have 2 beds at the Hartford house that are reserved for, either a student or a volunteer from abroad, a volunteer for peace, which all other Dismas houses have had. We've never had any volunteers live in the house. How would you envision it going, having a volunteer live in the house? Would it be any different to have somebody that has no criminal history, but still has to abide by all the same rules? I mean,
there probably could be some situations in which having a live-in volunteer like that could be kind of, helpful. I mean, in the evenings when it's all of us, inmates or convicts there by ourselves, and something arises where we see one of the other members of the house is obviously on drugs, or, obviously is doing something where they shouldn't be doing. Having a live-in person that's with no criminal record could probably, instill some better ideas in people. That's
more of like a neutral party.
Yeah. They probably come up with better ideas and better answers than what
that's the idea
than what we can come up with ourselves. Being full of criminal records and
not always as refined. Yeah,
right. And because I can think of some situations where I was trying to do the right thing and just send videos or pictures or whatever to you or
I remember
to other.
We had one person hallucinating.
Yeah, and so if there was someone there that was actually at the house that was like a live-in residence, it would just been easier than trying to deal with that myself as a member.
And I don't know how this would impact your answer as far as living at the house, knowing that it's not always great. Things do happen. I can recall some pretty good stories from that place every now and then. Would it change your answer if we were a female-only house? Is that something you would entertain for the experience? Would you live at a Dismas house for 6 months?
I think that would be really interesting, and I think it would, I find our time at Dismas to be so meaningful, and I think that would just kind of make it exponentially more meaningful to really like understand that transition and that what like people's struggles when living at Dismas and also kind of their progress. And I think it would be very challenging, it would take up some initial discomfort to kind of transition to that space. But definitely something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. I think I would definitely learn a lot and get to make closer connections with the residents. I think like from hearing Kevin's perspective on like why a volunteer would be helpful, like I personally don't think I would have the skills to deal with those situations. So I think it would take like a very like experienced, knowledgeable type of volunteer.
Hey, what do you mean like inherent in the job description?
Yeah.
It's just you would be there.
Yeah.
And I think, that's kind of the magic of Dismas. We're all just kind of normal, regular that'd
probably be basically what I would really, would really make it just matter though, is just the fact of you being there.
Yeah.
Because sometimes someone without a criminal record being there to collaborate the story of the person with a criminal record, make it that much easier.
Right. The live-in volunteer would be a credible source.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah, like, because, in some situations, the cops show up and they don't, if you have a criminal record, they don't want to believe everything you're saying. And they might just jump the gun and assume the worst or, and whatnot. So having someone there that is a witness with no criminal record that can say the same thing you're saying.
Maybe. Who knows? I've never lived it. I never had the experience of a volunteer in residence. Kevin, you don't have a substance abuse history.
No.
So what was it like for you living in a house of people, 80% or more of our residents struggle with addiction pretty hard? I remember appeals where we'd have to ask somebody to leave. This is now an antiquated system. But we used to ask somebody to leave for relapse reasons, and you always said, I don't know. I never lived it. So I can't speak to it. What was it like for you?
It was hard for me, really. I've never been through that life because of dealing with people that are in that life myself, and I've never had a good experience with the people in that life. So just the people that do use just cross my hairs in another way that I just can't really explain. I don't know. So it was difficult for me, and the way I feel about things sometimes. I feel like, if you're given an opportunity and you're making an active choice to go back to what threw you in jail, and then you're making the active choice to give up your opportunity. And that type of stuff just doesn't really, I have a hard time fathoming it. To me, it's just, I don't know. You knew it messed you up enough to get you put in jail. Why go back to it? Especially if you were in jail for a year, you're no longer addicted to it.
It's a deep rooted thing. Nobody's really figured it out.
Right. And for me, my brain just doesn't work that way. I have a hard time fathoming it. And I don't like the way people act when they're on certain drugs. And I did have a hard time with some instances there sometimes.
All right. To wrap up this podcast, Molly, Marisa, what does post Dartmouth life look like for you? What's your plans?
I'll hopefully go to medical school.
Oh, at Dartmouth or?
I don't know where yet.
To be a doctor?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to work in business for a few years.
Marissa got a job today.
Oh, where at?
A consulting firm. That's exciting. I hope to eventually work in international development. That's my major is development economics. So working in nonprofits and things like that.
Oh, so you're going to cycle back around and then take my job.
Yeah, that's the plan.
That'd be terrific. You'd be much better at it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of Going to Dismas. For more information about Dismas of Vermont, go to dismasofvt.org.
Thank you for listening to this Jam podcast. If you have found this program interesting and would like to find more Upper Valley content or learn how to produce your own media, please visit us at uvjam.org.